Hansi, South Africa's parliament also votes for their president, so CAB3 makes Zimbabwe just the same as South Africa. Wrong! In this episode, I'm going to be explaining to you why the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 3 takes away your right to vote for the president and replaces it with an undemocratic parliament voting for that president, which is a completely different system to what they have in South Africa. It is completely undemocratic, and we're going to be unpacking it in the next few minutes. So stay with me. So firstly, let's look at what CAB3 does. CAB3 takes away our right to vote directly for the president in a presidential election in section 92 of our constitution, and it replaces it with an indirect election of the president by parliament. Now let's be clear from the outset. I'm not saying that an indirect election of a president is inherently undemocratic. What I am saying is that the indirect election of the president that CAB3 creates is inherently undemocratic. And I'm going to give you 4 reasons for why that is the case. The first reason I covered in my previous video, and it's all about how CAB3 completely undermines our electoral architecture and ensures that we can't have a free and fair democratic election for MPs to parliament. So if you haven't watched that, go back and watch that one. Now I want to take you through what some have termed the Jigananda clause of CAB3. And this is a clause embedded in the new section 92 that clause 3 of the bill would seek to insert in the constitution. In particular, subsection 6 of the new section 92. And what that clause says is this: a person elected as president under this section must cease to be a member of parliament upon assuming office if they were a member at the time of the election. Those last words are the important ones, because what it means is that someone could become president without even being elected to parliament. Someone who was rejected in their primary elections, for example, Zimbabwe in the previous election, or someone who was rejected by their constituents, for example, Unelected in the previous election. Someone who has absolutely zero democratic base could become the president of Zimbabwe if they are able to buy off 186 members of parliament. Now, why 186? 186 members of parliament is a simple majority of a joint sitting of the two houses in terms of how they would be constituted if the bill goes through. That is 280 members of the National Assembly and 90 members of the Senate. Divide by 2 is 185. You need one more, that takes you to 186. That number, 186, becomes the magic number. That is the number of people that you need to convince to become the president of the Republic of Zimbabwe if CAB3 goes through. So all you need to do is buy 186 MPs a nicer vehicle than the next person, and voila, you become the president of the country. If there are 186 MPs who are corrupt enough to take that. But in a scenario where money and cars is being dished out left, right and center, where we just recently, a few weeks ago, had a situation where a member of the public who has been very vocal in support of CAB3 offered to fork out over $3 million to members of parliament, it is not far-fetched to say that people may begin to simply buy the presidency. This is an extremely worrying scenario for all of us, and it entrenches what we might call kleptocracy, that is, rule by thieves, where the most corrupt, the most unscrupulous people retain power. And our constitution now opens the door for kleptocracy to become embedded in our system, where that becomes essentially our official system of governance. No longer democracy, but rule by thieves. And if you are a kleptocrat who wishes to buy your way to the presidency, I have wonderful news for you, because CAB3 also embeds a monitoring and evaluation mechanism for you to just make sure that your money goes exactly where it's expected. Because CAB3 does not ensure that the vote for the presidency in Parliament will be by secret ballot. If you compare it to the vote for the Speaker of Parliament, which insists that it must be by secret ballot, the new Section 92 is completely silent on that issue, meaning that these members of Parliament will have to vote in public how they're going to vote. That means that a kleptocrat who has promised something to members of Parliament wouldn't even need to pay them in advance. The kleptocrat could simply wait to see whether the MPs vote for them and then pay them accordingly once they deliver on the job. Our Parliament, the way it's currently constituted, is not representative of the whole population of Zimbabwe, and therefore it's completely inappropriate for that parliament to be electing a president, and it's completely inappropriate to compare such a parliament to a parliament that is elected by proportional representation. But here's where it gets wild, because what CAB3 does is it makes our parliament even less democratic. So here's reasons 3 and 4 for why our undemocratic parliament should not be electing the president. Reason number 3 is the change to the role of traditional leaders. So section 281 subsection 2 says this: traditional leaders must not be members of a political party or in any way participate in partisan politics, act in a partisan manner, further the interests of any political party or cause, or violate the fundamental rights and freedoms of any person. And CAB3 takes all of that away. Control, Alt, Delete, gone. What that means is that traditional leaders can now be partisan functionaries. Now, how does that affect our parliament? Well, parliament is made up of 2 houses, the Senate and the National Assembly. So to understand this, we now need to go and look at the composition of the Senate, which is where 18 chiefs sit and vote as senators. The composition of the Senate is found in section 120 of the Constitution. And what you will see there is that 60 senators are elected by proportional representation, 2 are there to represent people with disabilities, and 18 are chiefs elected through the National Council of Chiefs. Now, currently, those chiefs are required, in terms of the Constitution, to be non-partisan. Now, traditionally, they often do vote with the ruling party, but the requirement that they must be non-partisan is actually a protection for chiefs. What this means is that if chiefs do not vote with the ruling party, that cannot be used against them to remove them as chiefs. Now, this is important because the president appoints chiefs. The president sets the terms of office of chiefs, the terms of service, and the president can remove chiefs. So if they have a requirement that they must be non-partisan, they have some protection from their appointing authority. Once you remove that requirement that they must be non-partisan, they essentially become political functionaries of their appointing authority. So we then have 18 political functionaries of the president sitting in a Senate of just 80 people. And then it gets worse, because CAB3 in clause 8 then gives the president power to appoint an additional 10 senators, increasing the Senate to 90 people. And these 10 senators will be completely unelected. They will have no democratic legitimacy whatsoever, because they can't derive their democratic legitimacy from the people because they're not elected, and they can't derive it from the president because the president is deriving it from the parliament. So it creates a circular environment where these 10 senators have absolutely no democratic legitimacy whatsoever. CAB3 itself is silent and ambiguous on the question of whether those 10 senators will be involved in the parliamentary election of the president, or at least the first parliamentary election of the president. And this is just an example of how shockingly badly the bill itself is drafted, that something as important as that is left completely vague and ambiguous. But there are things in the bill that should make us worry to believe that perhaps they would be involved in that election. If you look at clause 3 of the bill, which creates the new section 92, it says, the president must be elected by members of parliament in a joint sitting of the Senate and the National Assembly. We now need to understand when it talks of the Senate, how is the Senate defined? Well, the bill has defined the Senate as including those 10 unelected senators. So if you read those two clauses together, the Senate would only be fully constituted to elect the president once those 10 unelected senators are appointed. It leaves this very difficult and absurd chicken and egg situation where it's impossible for the Senate or the president to be properly constituted in order for one to appoint the other. This is a huge problem with the bill. But even if this is corrected during the parliamentary debate stage and it's made clear that the 10 unelected senators won't participate in the first presidential election, there is still major concern around the democratic legitimacy of elections to the president for future elections, because the same bill goes on to state that if a president is removed or dies in office, then a new president will be elected by the same system. So, will these 10 unelected senators then participate in the next election to appoint the president, despite the fact that they have zero democratic legitimacy? If you take those two clauses combined, the clause which changes the role of traditional leaders, essentially making them functionaries of the president, and the clause which allows the president to appoint 10 additional senators. It means before we get out the gate, the president essentially has 28 senators in a Senate of 90 people who are under his influence and control. What that means is that the ruling party only needs an additional 18 senators in order to get 46 senators, which is 50% of the Senate. That means that the ruling party would only need 30% of the vote at an election in order to retain control of the Senate. In the last episode, we demonstrated how, with the new tools of gerrymandering, with a completely non-independent delimitation commission and control of the voters' roll by the Registrar General appointed by the President, the ruling party would be able to retain control or legally win an election of the National Assembly with a mere 30% of the vote. Now we see in this episode how that 30% would translate into control of the Senate as well. So what it means is that we could go to an election and 70% of the population vote for opposition candidates in the parliamentary elections. 30% of the population vote for ZANU PF candidates in the parliamentary election. And through the combination of these mechanisms, ZANU PF could legally and without any election day rigging control both the lower house, the National Assembly, and the Senate with a mere 30% of the vote. And then that parliament, which is controlled by members of parliament, both senators and members of the National Assembly, who represent only 30% of the population, would then be able to elect your president when 70% of the population rejected that party. That is completely undemocratic. Don't forget to make your submissions to Parliament. You can email them to clark@parlzim.gov.zw. The address is here. Or you can submit them physically to the Parliament building, both the new Parliament building or the old Parliament building. Don't forget to contact your Member of Parliament, make your voice heard. Don't forget to use your rights to defend your rights. And until next time, stay tuned.